for just 99 bucks? Could this be the ultimate button box for your sim rig? Let's dive into the PXN Controller Box to find out. This is the Simpit. I'm your host Sean Cole, and today we are checking out the PXN Controller Box. This little $99 all-in-one solution could be the perfect button box to finish off your sim rig. And I think about it, it's been a while since we've even covered button boxes on the show. I mean, wheels, wheelbases, pedals, they get all the glory in sim racing. But when I think back in time, it was the button box that was the first accessory that you had to have in sim racing. So this little compact box is about 7¼ by 5½ inches wide and has 30 programmable functions. It has RGB lighting with 7 different colors and a plug-and-play setup for the PC. Its ABS resin case features a blue trimmed panel design with a carbon fiber look, flashy, functional, and perfect for sim enthusiasts. What I do dig about this button box is it has a great variety of control surfaces, which is really easy on the memory if you're old like me and have trouble remembering things. But you got a couple of rotaries on top, that's cool. You got the classic ignition sequence switches. You've got these 8 big buttons, and they're very large, they're prominent, and they're brightly colored, which again, easy on the memory. You got the 2 buttons here, they're smaller, and they're actually mapped. It's kind of cool. Like keyboard controls, escape and enter, and in certain like console port type games, that's gonna be really cool to have. And you can turn that off if you prefer them to be just standard buttons. You've got this little mini joystick, which has some good feel to it for a mini joystick, way better than the little ones you'll find on a steering wheel. And then you've got these up and down toggles, which are kind of cool as well. Some hold and some release. We'll talk about that later. On the back, you've got a 100 by 100 Visa mount, which is going to make it really easy to mount onto anything. You've got the clamp mount for it as well. You've got a plug-in for your USB, and then you have a little switch so that you can actually turn the lighting on or off if you prefer. When it came down to mounting this, I went with the clamp option, which I could just bolt to my rig, or again, you could mount a Visa mount to the back and mount it to virtually anything. For my rig, I just clamped it right off my steering wheel deck, easy to access, sturdy, and it looks fantastic. Now let's get down to driving with this button box, and before we do, we have to get in the car, so I have this button programmed to get in, but now we get into this classic starter situation. So we have the flip switch to turn on our ignition. You see we get lights on the dash, we get a light on the switch, and then when we press the button, we're gonna start the engine. That is pretty cool. Now, unfortunately, that sequence doesn't work in every single game in the world out there, and that is one of the difficulties of a button box. Do you want buttons that just click, or do you want buttons that hold? Same thing here, this is a holding button. Now, what's great about iRacing is I can now turn the car off as well. Now, you're gonna have to remember that, because when you crash and you just hit tow, if you've left it with the car on and you tow, you'll see that the switch is now out of sequence. So I would then not have the ability to turn my car on properly. So the only way out of that is to actually hit the escape button, make sure you have everything turned off, get back into the car, and we can start it up. But that is pretty cool, and I really love that about this button box for sure. All right, so when we're out there driving, let's talk about the different controls and the way they work. Obviously, up on top, labeled for ABS and traction control, we have these 2 encoders. Now, they turn left and right, and it's the equivalent of 2 different buttons. A left button giving you 1 click, and turning right giving you another click of a button. But they're very, very light to the touch, so if I was wearing gloves, these might be too delicate. So when you compare this to the amount of tension that, for example, the detent on those rotaries, entirely different. These are very lightweight, but that makes them pretty good for using something like adjusting volume, but I might not want to actually use them for ABS because I want something a little more precise like what I have here on the steering wheel. These 8 buttons here, I love about how big they are. I love that they're colored, and I love the way they just laid out so closely to me here. Easy to access, very quick, and I use these all of the time for the most important things that I'm going to do in the car that I don't have mapped on the steering wheel. Getting back to those momentary buttons, unfortunately the bottom 2 are holding buttons, And you'll find very, very few things in iRacing that actually respond to a holding button, but it's gonna work out great. And like, I mean, if I just, for example, I've been playing an American Truck Simulator, and there are things that you actually turn on and turn off that way. Usually in iRacing, something is an on and off button built into the same motion. The other thing about these big buttons is not only can you just reach over and find them, I mean, they're so easy to grab, but they have a good feel. You can hear the click when you press them, and it makes you know that you got a good connection there. These lower switches, same thing. I have this one for moving my cockpit up and down. And it works out great because it's a releasing toggle up and down, has a great feel to it, and it's also got a great click and a real precise action to it. I love it, metal topped, and that feels really nice as well. Unfortunately, the ones to the right are like we were talking about, these two buttons here. So, like, unfortunately there, you can see I have it for my field of view, and it just kept moving it until I released it. And that's the way these final three work. So for me, being mainly an iRacer, I would actually prefer these three to be just like this first one. But that's something that's a little difficult when you're making a button box, deciding, do you want things to respond or release just like you have that selection here? So at least they give you both options. The next thing, and I think one of the things that is really exceptional about this controller box, is this mini joystick here. I can reach over and very easily get left, right, up, down. I have it for my menus here, and it makes it really easy. And it's easy to be accurate because of the size and the amount of tension on this joystick. It's got a great feel to it. So when I was talking about the detent not being as good on these compared to the steering wheel, well, I can barely activate this joystick here with any kind of dexterity at all, versus I can be very precise on this 8-way switch. So it is one of the things I really, really love about this box, and I think is better than any button box. I've never had a joystick on a button box, and I've never had one that is quite this nice when it comes down to using it. I think the only thing we haven't covered beyond that are these two final buttons that can be keyboard controls for escape or enter. I actually turned that function off, and you can actually see that I have this one as my toe button. Now these are those old school buttons. You can hear that click. It's not quite as nice as the buttons over here. It kind of reminds me of an old DIY project, to be honest with you, but they've got a pretty good solid feel to them and a good amount of spring tension. Now you can see I made that mistake I warned you about. I towed back to the pits where I should be able to just re-enter the track, but I'm out of sequence on my ignition here. So what I need to do is turn it off. I need to get back to pit lane, back into the car, and then do that engine startup sequence, which is oh so cool. So overall, all the buttons and the variety of buttons, the way they're placed and laid out, works really nice. I don't even look at the labels on them because I have everything that memorized already because of the layout and the different types of controls. It makes it so easy to remember their function. The only other thing I can think about is really the size and the fact that it is kind of made of this ABS type resin plastic. That's one of the areas where it's kind of a cheaper button box. It's not as nice as those premium button boxes where this might have carbon fiber or some kind of acrylic trim, where you might have like an actual metallic surround on this engine start button, and just a little bit higher componentry, and that's one of the ways that it keeps it at that $99 price point. I did mention the programmability of these two buttons, being able to use them as keyboard controls, or like I said, I have a map for buttons, as simple as holding this button down and then pressing it. So that basically just turned this into the enter button. So it's now acting as enter on my computer, versus if I do this, it will now switch it back to working as a normal button. This handle button also works for adjusting the colors. If you want to change the color scheme, you've got 7 different colors to choose from, and it's that easy to toggle through them. And unfortunately, it's all for one for all of them the same color. We don't get a lot of variety other than the backlit. And we can also adjust the volume or the brightness of it with this knob here. So I like that as well. And then on the back, we have a switch. So if you don't want the lights on, or you want to turn them off when you're going to bed at night, you can do that as well. So a lot of easy functionality. It's all built in right there and no extra software, just plug and play. It's that basic. And now it's time for the Simpit's verdict, also known as the good, the not so good, and the bottom line. Starting off with the good is, it is relatively inexpensive at just $99. Great variety of control types. Flashy, cool design. Easy to mount. Fun RGB lighting. Excellent joystick functionality. Red buttons double as keyboard commands or mappable options. And then lastly, that super cool ignition start button sequence. You gotta love the authenticity. And now on to the not so good. Starting off with, it is mostly made of plastic. Rotary encoders turn too easily. Backlighting is single color across the board. Too many locking buttons and toggles. And now on to the bottom line. As I mentioned at the very beginning, the button box was really the go-to accessory for anyone new to sim racing. And as a result, so many years later, we have a million button boxes to choose from. And you could talk about something that's very, very inexpensive, maybe not even a button box, just a keypad for 10, 15 bucks, or a cheap button box for only $20 or $30. Those are great options. And at the same time, you can get button boxes well over $1,000 that are made of some exotic materials and some very, very high-end components. Now, at 99 bucks, this is kind of on the low end of the market, and for that, you get a lot of functionality, a pretty cool design. I like that it's very automotive with this sequenced engine start is kind of cool. You gotta kind of like that, and it does look really cool on my rig. So it is a great option. It's plug and play and really easy to use. So I hope you've enjoyed our review of the PXN Controller Box. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can find out when our next video comes out. And thank you for watching. This is the Simpit. I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.